Saudi Arabia just crossed the line it spent decades avoiding. At 2:34 a.m. Riyadh time, Saudi F-15 Strike Eagles launched from King Khalid Air Base and struck deep into Iranian territory. Not symbolic strikes. Not limited retaliation. A coordinated air campaign targeting Iran's nuclear program, ballistic missile sites, and Revolutionary Guard command infrastructure. Over 120 aircraft. 400 cruise missiles. The largest Saudi military operation in history. Within 3 hours, the United Arab Emirates joined with F-16 and Mirage strikes on Iranian coastal defenses. Bahrain activated its air defense network and opened airspace to coalition aircraft. Kuwait positioned Patriot batteries along its northern border. The Gulf Cooperation Council, paralyzed by internal divisions for years, unified into a combat coalition in under 6 hours. Iran's response was faster than anyone expected. And far more devastating than Riyadh calculated. Before we break down what happened next, hit that subscribe button. This is the story reshaping global energy markets and the future of the Middle East. The Saudi decision came after 72 hours of emergency consultations. MBS faced an impossible choice. Watch Iran dominate the region through proxies or strike now while American carriers were in theater and Israeli intelligence could provide targeting. He chose war. First wave hit at 2:34 a.m. Saudi and Emirati aircraft struck Natanz nuclear facility. Bunker busters penetrated 40 feet underground. Enrichment plant crippled in 20 minutes. Simultaneously, cruise missiles hit Revolutionary Guard bases near Bandar Abbas and Kerman. Iran's Southern Military Command went dark. Second wave targeted ballistic missiles. Isfahan, Parchin underground complexes. By 4 a.m., 60% of Iran's known missile sites destroyed. 0 coalition aircraft lost. For 90 minutes, it looked like the Gulf states had executed a flawless decapitation strike. Then Iran showed what it had been preparing for decades. At 4:47 a.m., Iranian missiles launched from hidden mobile platforms. Not aimed at military bases. Aimed at Aramco. Abqaiq processing facility, handling 7 million barrels daily, hit by Shahab-3 ballistic missiles. Processing towers collapsed. Entire complex engulfed in flames within 30 minutes. Ras Tanura export terminal struck next. Storage tanks holding millions of barrels erupted. The terminal exporting 6.5 million barrels daily completely disabled. Khurais oil field, 1.5 million barrels per day production. Iranian drones struck wellheads. Field went offline. 90 minutes. Iran destroyed facilities representing 50% of Saudi oil production. 15 million barrels per day of global supply gone. Oil markets reacted instantly. Brent crude, already elevated at $224 due to the Hormuz closure, spiked to $287 by Asian market open. By European trading, it hit $315. When New York opened, Brent touched $350. The largest single-day oil price increase in history. Not speculation. Not fear. Physical supply destruction on a scale the world had never seen. Strategic petroleum reserves were activated globally. The United States, China, Japan, and European nations released emergency stocks. But reserves are measured in days of consumption, not months. And the strikes weren't temporary disruptions. These were infrastructure demolitions that would take years to rebuild. Energy-dependent economies faced immediate crisis. Japan declared a national energy emergency and activated rationing protocols. Germany suspended industrial production in non-critical sectors. Airlines grounded 40% of flights globally due to fuel cost explosion. Trucking companies in the United States parked vehicles. The global economy, built on $80 oil assumptions, was collapsing under $350 reality. But Saudi Arabia's infrastructure was only the opening move. Iran struck deeper. At 6:15 a.m., Iranian missiles targeted the UAE's Jebel Ali port in Dubai, the largest port in the Middle East and a critical hub for global trade. 2 missiles hit container terminals. Fires spread to fuel storage facilities. The port, handling 15 million containers annually, shut down completely. Gulf trade infrastructure, the alternative to Suez and Hormuz routes, now compromised. Then Iran hit Saudi desalination plants. Ras Al Khair, the world's largest desalination facility, providing fresh water to millions of Saudis. Iranian cruise missiles struck the plant's power supply and pumping infrastructure. Saudi Arabia, a desert nation dependent on desalinated seawater, faced immediate water crisis in major cities. Riyadh, Jeddah, Dammam, all watching reservoir levels drop with no new supply coming online. The message was clear. You strike our strategic infrastructure, we destroy yours. You cripple our economy, we cripple yours. And we have more missiles than you have defenses. Saudi air defense systems, Patriot batteries, and THAAD interceptors performed well against the first wave of Iranian missiles. But Iran learned from decades of studying American doctrine. They fired in waves. Overwhelmed defenses with cheap drones and older missiles first. Deplete interceptor stocks. Then launch the precision weapons. By the time high-value Iranian missiles were inbound, Saudi defenses had gaps. Estimates suggest Saudi Arabia intercepted 60% of incoming threats. In normal scenarios, that's exceptional performance. But when you're facing 300 missiles in 6 hours, 40% getting through means 120 impacts. And Iran targeted those impacts for maximum economic pain. By 8 a.m., the scope of the damage became clear. Saudi Arabia had struck Iranian military and nuclear infrastructure. Iran had struck Saudi economic lifelines. Both nations were bleeding. But only one economy was built entirely on the infrastructure now burning. Saudi officials convened emergency sessions. American advisors presented grim assessments. The war Saudi Arabia thought would be a quick decapitation strike had become an economic war of attrition. And Iran was winning. International reaction fragmented instantly. The United States issued full support for Saudi Arabia's right to self-defense and condemned Iranian aggression. But behind closed doors, Pentagon officials were reportedly furious. Saudi Arabia launched the largest military operation in Gulf history without coordinating timing with American forces. U.S. carrier groups, still days from operational positions, could provide no immediate support. The Saudis struck alone and now faced retaliation alone. European nations called for immediate ceasefire. France and Germany issued joint statements urging de-escalation. But their urgency was driven by economics, not principle. With oil at $350, European economies faced recession within weeks. Pressure for ceasefire wasn't about peace. It was about survival. China and Russia blocked UN Security Council action and called the Saudi strikes unprovoked aggression. Beijing made clear that any disruption to Iranian oil exports would be met with Chinese support for Tehran. Russia echoed the stance. The world's largest energy consumers were picking sides. And they weren't choosing the Gulf. Saudi Arabia's regional position collapsed faster than its oil infrastructure. Qatar refused to join the coalition and opened diplomatic channels to Iran. Oman announced neutrality and offered to mediate. Iraq condemned the strikes and warned that any Saudi aircraft entering Iraqi airspace would be engaged. Even Jordan, a longtime Saudi partner, remained conspicuously silent. The Gulf coalition, unified for 6 hours, was fracturing under economic and diplomatic pressure by hour 12. Casualty figures began emerging by midday. Saudi Arabia reported 47 military personnel killed in the strikes, mostly air defense crews and personnel at bases hit by Iranian retaliation. Civilian casualties from Iranian missile strikes on Aramco facilities and desalination plants exceeded 200. The number was climbing as fires continued and rescue operations struggled with infrastructure collapse. Iran claimed over 400 dead from coalition strikes, including civilians near Natanz and workers at IRGC facilities. Tehran released footage of destroyed buildings and bodies being pulled from rubble. The images circulated on social media, fueling domestic pressure for even harsher retaliation. The economic toll dwarfed the human cost. Saudi Arabia lost 50% of its oil production in 90 minutes. Reconstruction estimates ranged from $80 billion to $120 billion. Timeframe for restoring full production, 18 to 24 months. For a nation that derives 70% of government revenue from oil exports, that timeline meant economic catastrophe. Aramco's stock, trading in Riyadh, collapsed 35% in a single day before trading was suspended. Saudi Arabia's sovereign wealth fund, the Public Investment Fund, faced margin calls on leveraged positions. The kingdom that had been investing billions in futuristic cities and global sports was now scrambling to maintain basic government operations. Then the second-order effects hit. With Hormuz closed and Saudi production offline, global oil supply faced a deficit of 25 million barrels per day. No combination of strategic reserves, increased production elsewhere, or demand reduction could fill that gap in the short term. The math was simple. The world consumed more oil than it could access. Prices would keep rising until either supply returned or demand collapsed through economic destruction. Gasoline prices in the United States hit $9 per gallon within 48 hours. Europe saw equivalent increases. Protests erupted in capitals worldwide. Governments that had supported the war effort faced domestic fury from populations unable to afford transportation, heating, or food as logistics costs exploded. The political question became unavoidable. Was the destruction of Iran's nuclear program worth the collapse of the global economy? Saudi officials argued yes. The rest of the world was no longer sure. MBS addressed the Saudi public in a televised speech. He framed the strikes as necessary defense against Iranian aggression. He promised Saudi Arabia would rebuild stronger. He vowed continued strikes until Iran ceased all hostile actions. But behind the rhetoric, Saudi planning was shifting. The quick victory scenario was dead. This was now a war of survival. And survival required a level of international support that was evaporating by the hour. So where does this go? Saudi Arabia cannot back down without looking defeated and emboldening Iran permanently. Iran cannot stop retaliating without appearing weak to domestic audiences demanding revenge. The United States cannot abandon Saudi Arabia without destroying its credibility across the entire Gulf. And the global economy cannot survive sustained $350 oil without systemic collapse. Every path forward leads to worse outcomes. Escalate further and risk Iran striking Abu Dhabi, Doha, or even attempting to hit Israeli targets to widen the war. De-escalate and accept that Iran retains enough capability to threaten the Gulf indefinitely. Or maintain the current level of conflict and watch the world economy disintegrate under energy prices no nation can sustain. The next 72 hours will reveal which choice the Saudis make. Whether American support materializes into actual military intervention. Whether Iran's domestic pressure forces even more aggressive strikes. And whether global economic collapse forces a ceasefire no one wants but everyone needs. Right now, Saudi Arabia is discovering what Israel learned in Lebanon and what the United States learned in Iraq. Starting a war is easy. Ending one on your terms is almost impossible. And when the war you start threatens global oil supply, the entire world has a vote in how it ends. If this opened your eyes to what's really happening, Hit that subscribe button, share this with someone who needs to understand the stakes, and stay tuned. Because the next 48 hours could determine whether this war stays regional or collapses the global economy entirely.